is here under of its creators, director Kay Matschullat, and composer and sound artist Nick Ryan. At the ANC, the guided moderator for the afternoon, Arlie DuBois. Oh, nice. And I'll give Luke a proper introduction and let him manage our panel. Luke creates music, art, software, and circuits, not necessarily in that order. And he performs regularly using both digital and analog instruments, including Surge synthesizers. And his work appears on nearly 25 albums, both individually and as part of the avant-garde electronic group, the Freight Elevator Quartet. His work explores the temporal, verbal, and visual structure of cultural and personal ephemera, using data-driven technique to investigate time, memory, identity, and the meaning of portraiture in the United States in the 21st century. He's a professor of integrated design and media at NYU Tandem School of Engineering. Thanks for me.
I'm not using the stage until one of you tells me how I get all of that in my house. That's my takeaway from this. Yeah. Right, you gotta see. No. But you gotta be friends with Dolby, but I think I gotta be friends with you guys. So that's my thing. I think that was fantastic and beautiful, and I want it in my home as the soundtrack to my life. And I want to know how you guys met, started collaborating, where you came up with this. So give me the quick story.
Okay, so we did a piece at our festival in 2021 called Siren about whale songs. So it got me into whale communication. And then I read David's book, Sounds Wild and Broken, which is life-changing. I recommend it. And I thought, how do we go see various ecosystems and listen to the world and see how it's changing? And, I called Michelle Fournet, who was featured in Fathom, and I said, Michelle, I really want to work on this sound with you and different bioacousticians. And she said, you got to meet Nick Ryan. So I thought I'd been doing this magical thinking, like how can you make all these thousands of hours of recording into a world and into a piece, and enter Nick. And in the last 3 years, we've been working together to make this piece. And I should say, we are just beginning to add some visuals. And unfortunately, David Becali couldn't be here today. Very, very talented video artist. So that's really the origin. I gathered the scientists, and they graciously and generously allowed us to use their field notes, which are dramatic and personal, and give you this sense of being on the ground with them and the animals. So that's how it came. And then Nick taught me about sound.
So just a bit of background with my work with whales. So I had the pleasure of working on a film called Fathom for Apple TV, which told the story of two bioacousticians, and Michelle was one of them, Michelle Fournet, and she studies humpback whales in southern Alaska. And I had the pleasure of spending most of lockdown on my own in a big building in London, listening to whales under the ocean. That's awesome. And it was really quite an amazing experience, actually. And one of the things that occurred to me was none of these animals are experiencing lockdown like we are. But then I realized a few years later when I was talking to Michelle that I was completely wrong. And actually their world was changed by lockdown too. And for the first time, as she said to me, the sound of the ocean became like it was pre-industrial revolution, which was quite striking thought. And these whales started to communicate in ways that they might have done, 400 years ago. So I realized that through that film that the sound of the natural world was changing. I also got to work with her field recordings, which were extraordinary accounts in audio of the changing underwater landscape. But we might talk a bit later about technical stuff, but her recordings are made using underwater microphones, and she places 4 of them in a grid, a kilometer apart, and she leaves them there for a few hours at a time. So the recordings you were hearing of those humpback whales were hers. In fact, all of the recordings you were hearing were from scientists. Michelle's not here today, Gelvis, you are. And Michelle's recordings are quite unique because they are a place that even keys can't go, but microphones can.
Right, so you got this corpus of audio, right? So you got Michelle's whales, you got the
Rankers, you have the birds. You also have, I thought, brilliantly conceived moments of just diegetic, like people being people as contrast, right? Us in our cafes and with our motorboats and with all our horrible noises, by contrast. Can we talk about your like compositional practice a little bit? Like, how do you make sense of all that? What were you thinking in terms of story building? All of that, you're sort of going through these 3 biomes, but you've also got, like Kay said, you've got the field notes, right, to work on. And then we'll get to it in a minute. You bring the singer, you bring in others.
Sure. So Kay, do you want to talk a bit about the what was a very iterative process?
Yeah, very iterative, and we had this wonderful journey together to create the field notes. I could have to say editing and with the scientists and compiling that script, and then writing with David, the voice of the planet, as we call his character, was a very wonderful odyssey for me. And so that is what I hope took you on the journey. And so within that just took, it takes iteration to create that and to try to tell a story, but also deeply try to give the stage to the animals, because this is a collaboration with they're collaborating with the animals every day. We collaborated with them here. So that's what's important to us, to give the stage, if you will, to them. And I hope we succeeded in that. And so the process was finding a script, a story that could tell the animal story, and to hear climate change and climate change isn't one thing. Climate change are these various impacts, various very large human impacts. So to hear the animals' story, but to hear our story, keeping interrupting, if you will, that story.
And putting on your like recovering drama professor hat for a minute, like you got to you got to use all these field recordings. You got the entire like the wildlife as part of your dramatis personae, right? And so like, what are you trying to get the audience to get out of all this? Like, what's
Okay, that's kind of a big question. Go for it. Okay, so
want to hear it.
You want to create art that has impact, right? That has impact. But my profound, deepest feeling is that I take the tenet of Buddhism that says only through pain is there greater awareness, and I turn that around when I'm thinking about art that you want to have impact, and say only through greater awareness is there change for the better. So our goal with this is to raise awareness. I hope invite you into those places and have you connect to the natural world. And it's very much not our desire to beat you over the head and tell us all how bad we are, because we kind of know that. So we have to have some way to get inside and be part of this conversation with the earth. So that, does that,
Yeah. What do you say?
Yeah, and so I think what you just said kind of opens up this whole amazing kind of conversation that we've been having for a couple of years about the difference between communicating this world, this natural world, through speech and text and what you might call data, information, and the difference between that and communicating it with sensation. And we'll talk a bit more about this in the next session, but it strikes me, or I was very struck by the fact that sound as a form of data, which is, by the way, what these scientists refer to it as bioacousticians, they call their recordings data, because it is data, it's scientific data. But unlike any other kind of form of scientific data that I can think of, sound is experienceable. So if you asked a climatologist to show you rainfall data, what they wouldn't do is pour a bucket of water over your head.
Right. Probably not.
They'd probably just show you a graph. One axis you'd have the amount of rainfall, and the other axis you have time. Say, and you can do that with sound. And I think later we'll see a spectrograph showing exactly that, amplitude and time. But what's unique about sound as data is that you can actually play it to someone, and what they're experiencing is the same stuff. It's not reduced to a diagram. It is sound. So you're able to actually, we were able with these recordings to explore storytelling as a sensation as well as information.
Right. Because it's how we do it as well. Right. Sound is how we communicate. Right. We often fail to notice that even though we think we're a very visual culture, like we're talking to each other right now, we're not typing at each other, we're writing at one another. Right. So the most direct way we have to get an idea across is like speech, right? So I think there is something like really just like kind of a little subversive even about what you guys are doing, because you're weaving together in a very symphonic way musical elements, text, drama with this raw material that is the impact to the scientists who are bringing out, right? Right. You don't have to wash it through a PowerPoint. It's not like an intermediate truth, right? It's not like you have to turn it into something that's legible. It's already something that's legible.
Yeah, and it's experienceable, and in first hand. It's not second-hand experience, it's a first-hand experience. So, although you are not Wendy, or VJ, or Michelle, you are standing, I would like to think, beside them, and that's where the spatial sound comes in, because we are playing you I'm a bit cautious about the word simulation, but a portrait, a spatial portrait of what it's like to be there, and that speaks for itself, right? But then on the other side of the coin is the didactic and the narrative and the spoken and the text, which open up this kind of whole opportunity for us to explore not just the language of us, but the language of the animals. And Michelle and Wendy in particular are interested in the phonemes, the sounds that these animals make. So we saw an opportunity to actually blur the boundary between the speech sounds that we make when explaining this story, and the speech sounds that the animals make. And that's where Eliza came.
Yeah, so tell us about Eliza. How was that? Because she was great.
Yeah, I think it just struck me and us that in order to elevate this in some way, and to have the human, the Homo sapien, be able to enter it, that the guide of a vocalist would be hopefully somewhat sublime. And Eliza, I went to Carnegie Hall one night to see a concert by Roomful of Tea, the very interesting ensemble, and Eliza was the soprano, and I said, that's the person for this. So she agreed, and it's just been a pleasure. She couldn't be here today. And to say this will be performed live at times with Eliza doing live vocals. So watch for those opportunities because she's incredible.
And that's really cool, right? So she's doing, were you, is it like somewhat improvised? Did you score it for her a little bit? Like, 'cause she's doing human mimicry. She's also doing these kind of like coloratura, just like, yeah, like phrases that are,
Yeah, so we tried lots of different things. Our initial tests involved writing script based on the field notes, but asking her to decorate those improvisatorily with reference to the sounds of the animals that those field notes deal with. So she would do an orangutan kish, run out to go to script, and then she would do a humpback whale. And then, as you heard in the last section with VJ's acronyms, she started to kind of turn the words into bird-like songs. And but then we also did a thing where we selected some animal sounds and she imitated them perfectly as well. So it was a whole kind of load of different tests, and then we started then seeing those to do 10 super well.
tell me about, so like, there's a lot of people on this project. It's not a simple one, right? You're doing a long range iterative collaboration with, like, I mean, there's sort of maybe, half a dozen few people you're working with, but it's really dozens of people, right? You've got lots of stuff. And so talk about like this scope of work, like the challenge of collaborating with so many people, where it's like for you. And
Well, yeah, I think it is challenging to keep everybody on the same page and comfortable with the work because it's iterative and it's complicated. I think because we started with such a strong connection that helped, and that's Nick had this connection to Michelle, so she kind of intrinsically trusted us. And then the other scientists came in and gave us their trust, and David and I met early, and somehow, we all, so that core group of trust was established. And so that's so key in a class, everything. And I have to, this, what we do at Max is create collaborations between scientists and artists and creative technologists. And by the way, this is the first in our salon series this year called Collaboration as Resistance. And the idea is that it's through collaboration that we're going to make the most powerful work and the most effect and have possibility for change. So just a slight pitch. November 1st is our Max Machina weekend, also generously funded by Simon's Foundation, where you'll see other artists' work, and the second salon. And then in January, with our partner Oye Group on the salon series, you'll see in Under the Radar Festival, as part of the Radars Festival, Flaco Jimenez's piece, Harkin, where he collaborates with AI, Kier Chen, a wonderful creative technologist, and Colonial
he's a student of ours.
Kier Chen, right? We found her at IDM. That's right. That is absolutely right. And a lot of our interns from IDM have become part of our staff, part the creators. It's a great.
They figure it out.
They do. And so that's in January 2019. And Black House is an amazing force, and they're great partners. So look it up on our website. Follow us at MediaArtX.
So for this piece, though, what I wanted to ask you guys, and then we're going to turn over to the audience so we're going to sign this up, is what's next, right? So I know you're integrating visuals. So kind of tell us a little bit about that, you guys. Sure. And everything else, right? Like where is this going after?
Sure. So this version that you've heard, I would say, is something we're really proud of, and we're really proud to play it. But it is in development. There's so much more that we're going to do in collaboration with scientists, in collaboration with the technology. I should just mention the team here and the Dolby Atmos system quickly, because this is, at least according to Fred, and I agree with him, the projectionist, this and the head of tech here, this is the best sound cinema in New York right now. It's grandly, and many of you will have encountered immersive sound through the cinema, and Dolby Atmos is probably the most well-known form of immersive audio. There's 65 speakers in here around you, and they're 8 subwoofers, 4 behind the screen, 4 flown up there. So it's a pretty phenomenal sound system to work with, and I think there is a lot more that we can do. We can play with technology. We can use motion capture to move sound around with the performer. We want to experiment with Eliza, her live performance, because as a musician herself, she does manipulate the sound of her voice in real time, using looping and various effects. So that's a whole area, but Kay can talk a bit more about the future plans.
Yeah, we're working on another iteration for an exciting new space opening at the Boston Museum of Science. And as every space has its own format, so everything, it's an adjustment, but also it's an opportunity to make another incarnation of it. So it'll have a long life there, so watch for that premiere in the fall of 26. And then hopefully we'll have hopefully it'll take a global odyssey as well. We can only hope. So that's it's
Will there be a version where it's in my home?
It depends how big your home is, right? But can I just add one other thing?
That's really important about the ongoing work is the visual element.
Right. Yes.
And we are exploring this with David Bengali, who creates the visuals. These are sort of very early tests, and we decided to try out different ideas in each chapter. Be very interested to know what you have to, or any questions about that. But we're experimenting with this dichotomy between having total darkness, where the images are in your head. The pictures are best on radio, as they say.
Yeah, sure.
All the images are external and inspire you to imagine. So this is what we're playing with, and also playing with text and the language as well.
and you guys are the first to see any of the visuals, so we really love.
Right. This is a beta test.
Yeah.
You went through a couple different ontologies of how to do that, right? That I think are really interesting, right? If it was mixing regular footage, but then you can do, kind of the synesthesia stuff, or you can do, it's really cool. Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff. So we got a few minutes left before we have the rest of the crew join. Do any of you guys have questions for these two? You could shout it at me, and I'm going to repeat them into the mic for the recording. So yeah, we're in the front.
I guess my question is, I'm asking this question for you to help me explain something. And I think what I sense from this piece is maybe a genuine belief in the ability of sound to connect. Right. And I think one thing I feel is this idea of sound as kind of this undercurrent that flows through us. And it is temporal, and it's always moving, and it's ever present. Right. And I guess I'm coming from a standpoint where I'm assuming this necessary dichotomy between man and nature, right? I think there's this idea that we are retreating increasingly into immersion. And I think this being the immersiveness of the sound here unsettles me to a degree, because it's not like anything you would ever experience in your home, at least not for the present, right? But there's that desire to bring nature into the home. And I wonder, there's something so, disembodying about the video recording. It displaces sound from time and place. And I guess like if we see sound as this web that connects us, like what we've experienced here in the theater, does that put us part of the larger sound system and reconnect us back to nature, or is it like a virtual imitation of the real thing that we are growing increasingly comfortable accepting? And I guess that it's, I don't know, it comes from like a place of negativity by coping.
So like, how do we keep, you started asking with the immersive quality, how do we keep it so that it still grounds us to what the source material is, so that it's not just this disconnected, because it's like CGI for our ears, right? Where it's something else. Yeah, I think it's a really good. That's a cool thing to talk about. And yes,
Brilliant question. I mean, I'm interested that you use the word retreat into immersion. And I think that's a really interesting perspective. I kind of think about it in the opposite way. I think about it as being an expansion into immersion, and that immersive experiences allow us to see outward rather than inwards. But I totally understand your point about the dislocation. Again, I'm not deliberately taking the opposite view, but when you say we're kind of moving nature into here, I would argue we're moving us into nature. I would argue that it's the intention, at least, is to do the opposite, actually, because nature is out there, and we're not disturbing it by doing this. But intellectually, I think it's quite an interesting. I mean, it's a very interesting question, and I think of a piece by an artist called S. Devlin, which was done recently in central London, which I very strongly disagreed with.
Talk about the erosion, I think.
Yeah, it was putting a forest, quote unquote, in a in a square in central London. Most of the trees died. There are loads of parks nearby, and it was the most abhorrent idea of rewilding, and that is the worst case. I think what's really different, I'd like to think about this piece, is it's narrative driven. It's not about simulation for simulation's sake. It's not a VR experience. It's about exploring the feeling of nature and following the work of the scientists. That's really the message. And also, I think we might talk about this a bit more, but I think it's crucial as an artist for me to collaborate with scientists and maintain the rigor of the scientific data. Making artwork which is using scientific data like sound is not about watering that data down. It's about portraying it in a different way, but maintaining the scientific rigor.
yeah, Tim. Could we get one more question? We'll switch, sir, at the top. Yeah. Hi, David.
Question for Nick, really, also about the spatialization. I was curious how much of the source material came from binaural or microarrays, or you mentioned the hydrophones are an array of 4, and then because you describe it as a first-person experience of those sounds, and I found it much more second-person through an interpretation. I was curious if you could talk about the source material and then choices you made along the way.
Yeah, so I mean, unavoidably, it is second person, but in a narrative sense. But I like to think that this immersive sound experience is firsthand in the sense that it is not being translated. It is sensory data information. And then in terms of spatial formats, interestingly, most of the recordings are either mono or stereo, but they're made from multiple mono microphones. And if I'm not mistaken, Wendy places up to 8 microphones throughout the forest. So what's really fun is bringing that spatial configuration into the theatre. And I've not yet found sounds which overlap. I've not yet found an animal moving from one microphone into another. But there are definitely cases of that. So there is a kind of, there is a spatial array.
Can I just say one thing about this question? That's a very thoughtful, interesting question, and so it makes me have to admit that part of the impetus for this piece is we are in the Anthropocene, whether we like it or not, and so hopefully we can make this a better period. And in order to do that, we are collaborating with these animals in order to bring people a sense of nature if they can. I mean, somebody, when we showed it in London last week, somebody came up to me from the prisons and said the prisoners would love to hear this. You know, they don't get out, they don't know what to do, they don't know what they can do. So perhaps it's idealistic, but the sense of possibility in this experience is, you know, is important, and again, perhaps very idealist.
They're not just sort of library sounds or forest.
Right.
These are sounds that no one else has heard, and in many cases will no longer exist. So you, as an audience, are able to experience the sounds that scientists like Wendy and Michel and Puget are very unique in the recording and capturing. And some of them have disappeared. That's cool.